The sun burned low over the Rio Mora Valley, casting gold light across the dust and thorn brush. Nicolas Herrera wiped his brow with the back of his hand and shifted his weight in the saddle. The wind kicked up a veil of grit, and the horse beneath him shifted uneasily, hooves crunching against the hard-packed earth. He shouldn't have come into town. He knew better. Every time he stepped off the ranch, it scraped old wounds raw. Faces whispered behind their hands. That's the widower. Lost the wife and baby same week. Hasn't been right since. He heard it without hearing it. Saw the pity in their eyes. He'd ridden in for one reason: a stallion Garrett had offered to sell. Bloodline worth breeding. Nothing more, nothing sentimental. But the road into Rio Mora was packed with wagons and boots. Children clung to skirts. Men stood smoking under the eaves, and a voice too loud, too desperate rose from the town square. Nico should have turned his horse around, should have gone back to Rancho Cielo Azul, waited a week. But that voice. Last one, folks can't send the train back with just one. Nico reined his horse beside the general store and slid down dust swirling around his boots. He pushed through the crowd, sweat damp on the collar of his shirt, and something in his gut twisted tighter with every step. A wooden platform stood in the center of the square. Heat shimmered off the boards. Atop it, a man in a sweat-stained suit waved a handkerchief at the crowd, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting. And at his side, she was small, barefoot with blood crusted around her ankles where the sun-split wood had bitten into her skin. Her dress was barely cloth anymore, just strips and threads. Her arms wrapped around a stuffed bear so torn it hardly held shape, stuffing leaking from its seams. Tangled black hair clung to her face. She didn't move, didn't cry. Her eyes, dark and wide, too old for her face, looked out across the square and past it, like she'd already left this place behind. 3 years old, the auctioneer called, sweating through his shirt. She eats nothing, not a word out of her in days. No trouble, just needs somewhere to sleep. Come on now. Surely someone's got space for one quiet little girl. Nobody moved. A woman near the front clutched her baby closer. Too small, someone muttered. She won't be no help for years, looks sickly, another added, and half wild. The girl didn't blink. Nico's stomach turned. He'd seen men stare down dying horses with more sympathy. She's the last one, the man begged. Otherwise it's the train back to Santa Fe or Helena. Don't want that. Everyone knew what that meant. The Helena workhouse chewed children up and spat them out hollow. If they came out at all. Nico took a step forward. He wasn't thinking, not the way he usually did, with careful logic weighing every move. He just saw her flinch when a wagon wheel creaked nearby. Saw the blood on her heel. The white imprint of ribs beneath the grime on her skin. The way she held that broken bear like it was the last good thing in the world. The wind shifted. She blinked and looked straight at him. Not a plea. Not hope. Just looking. Like she was checking which direction the next blow might come from. Wait, Nico said. His voice was quiet, but it sliced the square like a knife. All heads turned. The auctioneer stared. Senor Herrera, how much, sir? With respect, it's not exactly a sale, more of a placement. The fee's $5, but Nico pulled out his wallet and peeled off a crisp 50. He laid it on the podium without ceremony. That enough? The man swallowed hard. More than. I'll take her. Papers will take just a minute. There's a. Nico ignored him. He stepped onto the platform slowly, boots thudding. The girl didn't move, but her arms curled tighter around the bear. He knelt. The heat off the boards rose like breath. What's your name? He asked, voice low, even. Nothing. He nodded toward the bear. That your friend?" Still nothing but her eyes tracked him now, watching, measuring. "I'm Nico," he said. "I've got a ranch east of here, lots of horses. Quiet place." A twitch, her lashes fluttered. She shifted slightly, favoring her left foot. Her right heel was raw and blistered. "You like horses?" he asked. A flicker. The barest shake of her head, no, but not with fear. He reached out and touched the bear's torn ear with one finger. "They're softer than him. You'd like them." The auctioneer handed over the papers, babbling something about Reverend Pike's blessing about orphans from the Territory Relief Line. Nico signed without looking. Then he turned back to the girl. "I'm going to pick you up," he said. "Nice and easy. We're going to get you food, a bath, a bed with clean sheets. You don't ever have to come back here. Understand?" She didn't answer, but she didn't flinch either. He slid one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her gently. She was featherlight, all bone and air and silence. Her body went rigid like she was bracing for a hit. "It's okay," he murmured, brushing her hair back from her face. "You're safe now. I got you." He stepped off the platform as the crowd parted in uneasy silence. Somewhere someone whispered something ugly. He didn't care. At the wagon, Mateo stared. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Mateo scratched his head. "You just bought a child. I know what I did." They rode out of town in silence, the wind warm on their faces. The girl, still unnamed, sat beside Nico, her bear clutched tight, her feet bandaged in linen scraps from Nico's saddlebag. As they passed the bend by the river, she spoke, just one word rasped from disuse. "Masa." Nico blinked. "Your bear." She nodded once, then pressed it tighter against her chest and didn't speak again. He kept his eyes on the road. A man didn't get to fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, he could fix this. She walks like a shadow that's trying not to be seen. The gate creaked as Nicholas guided the wagon into Rancho Cielo Azul, the late light slanting gold across the dry fields and weathered fence posts. The girl sat beside him on the buckboard seat, small and silent, holding her bear like a shield. She hadn't spoken again since that single whispered word, "Masa," and she hadn't looked at him once. The dogs barked when they reached the main house, but quieted when they saw Nico. The girl didn't flinch at the noise, just curled in tighter around her stuffed bear. Doña Martina stepped out from the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. She stopped cold when she saw what Nico lifted from the seat. "Dios santo," she murmured. That a child or a breath of smoke? Nico carried the girl carefully, her legs dangling like sticks. "Her name's Rosie," he said. "I think." "You think that's what she told me her bear's called?" "Might be the bear. Might be her." Martina didn't ask more. She opened the door and stepped back to let them in, but her eyes followed every move Nico made. He laid Rosie down gently on the wide bench near the fireplace. "She's not hurt, not right now," he said. "But her feet are blistered and she hasn't eaten. Bad shape." Martina nodded slowly. "You want to explain how this happened before or after I find food after?" Rosie sat still as stone, her arms locked around the bear. Her eyes flicked around the room, hearth table, the back hallway, but she didn't speak or move. Martina lit a lamp and moved into the kitchen. Nico sat on the bench beside the child, just close enough to feel the heat of her thin arm. She didn't lean into him, but she didn't scoot away either. "I got a stew," Martina said from the stove. "It's rabbit. Not much spice, but soft." She poured a small bowl, tore a slice of bread from the loaf on the counter, and brought it over. She eat by herself, we'll find out. Martina crouched, setting the bowl on the table beside Rosie. "You hungry, Mija?" No response. "She didn't eat in town," Nico said. Not one bite. Martina glanced up at him, her mouth tight. They teach some kids that food's a prize, that you only get it if you earn it. Rosie's fingers twitched. She looked at the bowl, but didn't move toward it. Nico reached, slowly broke the bread in half and handed it to her. "This is yours," he said. "No one's going to take it. Not now, not later." She took it. Not quickly, not eagerly, but with slow, deliberate fingers. She tore off a piece, chewed it dry, and swallowed without blinking. Martina rose. "There's water on the stove. I'll get her washed after she eats." "No," Nico said. Rosie stiffened. He turned to her, lowering his voice. "Not tonight. No bath unless you want one." Her jaw clenched, but she gave the smallest shake of her head. Nico nodded. "She decides when," he said. "Everything's different now." Martina's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. "Fine. She sleeps in the blue room. Small, but it's got a window. I'll show her." Rosie finished the bread, then the stew fast, like she feared it might vanish. She glanced at the door more than once while eating. When the bowl was empty, she looked at Nico not with thanks, but with guarded expectation. He stood and held out a hand. "Let's go find your room." She didn't take it, but she stood. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the wooden floor as she followed him down the hall. The blue room was quiet, and plain bed with a patchwork quilt, low dresser, a crocheted rug, and a single oil lamp burning beside the window. The curtains were open, and the twilight sky stretched out above the fields, pale purple and peach. Rosie paused at the doorway. Her hand tightened on her bear. "This is yours," Nico said. "The whole room. No one else's. Just you." She looked at the quilt, the dresser, the lamp, then at him. Her bottom lip trembled just once. "Biscuit, too," she whispered. Nico smiled. "Masa, too." She stepped inside like she was expecting the floor to vanish. She touched the quilt, then the dresser, then placed her palm flat against the glass pane. She sat on the edge of the bed, lightly, uncertainly, like it might be a trick. "What's your name again?" she asked. "Nico." "Nicolas, really, but everyone calls me Nico." She nodded slowly, the name sitting awkwardly in her mouth like a foreign word. You won't make me go back." The question nearly broke him. "No," he said, crouching to her level. "I won't make you go back. This is your home now." She stared at him long and hard, hunting for the lie. When she didn't find it, she nodded once. "Okay." Martina came to the door with a nightgown that would hang nearly to Rosie's ankles. "We'll burn that rag she came in," she muttered. Rosie flinched as she approached. "Easy," Nico said. "Nobody's gonna touch you without your say." Rosie didn't speak, but after a long moment she let Martina help her change. When the dress fell away, Nico looked away. He couldn't help it, but he heard the sharp intake of breath. Martina's voice came low and strangled. "Madre de Dios." When he looked again, he saw why. Her back. Old scars faded white. Newer ones, pink and angry, some scabbed, some not. Belt marks, switches, straps. He turned and walked out of the room, down the stairs, through the door into the yard. The air outside was dry and dark, full of stars and dust. He stood in the middle of the corral, hands shaking. Someone had done that to a 3-year-old girl. Someone had called it punishment. Martina found him there an hour later. Her voice was tired and soft. "She's asleep. Took a while. Wouldn't close her eyes till I promised to leave the lamp on. She's terrified of the dark. She's terrified of everything." Nico didn't answer. The scars on her back. "I know. I'm going to kill someone," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was just a fact. "Not tonight, you're not." Martina gripped his arm. "Tonight you sit with her. Tomorrow we figure out how to help." Because that girl don't know how to be a child anymore. She don't know how to ask or want or even feel safe. I saw it, he said. Every step she takes, she's bracing for a blow. She'll need time. A lot of it. I can give her time. Then you already started helping. Martina turned back toward the house. After a moment, Nico followed, stopping only to glance at the upstairs window. The lamp still burned. She hadn't asked for light. She'd begged not to be left in the dark. And that light would stay on. Every night. As long as she needed. These ain't bruises from clumsiness. Somebody meant every one. Nico stood in the hallway outside the blue room, arms crossed, spine stiff against the wall. The door was cracked open, just enough to see the warm glow of the oil lamp still burning. Rosie lay curled on the bed, her tiny frame barely making a dent in the quilt. The bare massa was tucked against her chest, one stitched eye hanging loose. She hadn't moved in over an hour, but he knew she wasn't asleep. Not really. Her eyes blinked every so often, wide and wary. He hadn't lit a cigar. Didn't want the smoke near her. But he needed something to do with his hands, so he just stood there, waiting. Martina came up behind him, soft-footed, carrying a tin basin, a folded cloth, and a bottle of ointment. "She'll let me?" she asked in a low voice. "Don't know," he said. She didn't fight the nightgown, but she stiffened the whole time. Like she was somewhere else. Martina nodded. "I'll go slow." He watched her disappear into the room. She knelt beside the bed, murmured something so gently he couldn't hear. He heard the whisper of cloth sliding off a small shoulder. Then a pause. And then that sound, a sharp, choked breath. Not Rosie's. Martina's. Nico stepped in. The basin of water sat untouched on the floor, but the nightgown had slipped down Rosie's back. Martina's face had gone gray. "Don't." Nico said it firmly, quietly. "Don't make that sound." Rosie didn't look at them. Her face was turned toward the wall, eyes open. Martina composed herself, but her hands trembled as she dipped the cloth into the warm water. She worked slowly, dabbing around the newer scabs, the angry pink welts still healing. "She doesn't flinch," Martina whispered. "Not once." "That's not right, I know. These ain't bruises from clumsiness. Somebody meant every one." Nico's jaw clenched until his teeth hurt. "I'm guessing a belt," Martina continued. "Or a strap. Some of these are weeks old, others fresh." "Yeah." Martina met his eyes. Who would do this to a baby? He didn't answer, just stepped forward and reached for the bear. Rosie didn't move, didn't blink. He brushed a bit of dirt from its stitched arm. "You ever tell anyone?" he asked softly. Still no answer. She kept staring at the wall like it was safer to pretend they weren't there. "You don't have to now," he added. "Not until you're ready. But we're not like them. You're not going to get hurt here." She didn't nod, didn't speak, but her fingers gripped the bear just a little tighter. By the time Martina finished applying the ointment and smoothing the gown back over her shoulders, Nico had started pacing the hallway again. Every step was measured, not rushed. He didn't want Rosie to hear the anger that was building in him like a fire through dry brush. Martina came out, closed the door gently behind her, and rubbed her hands on her apron like she needed to scrub off more than ointment. "She needs a doctor," she said. "I'll send word to Galvan, but she's out in Mora till the end of the week." Martina looked toward the window. "She's not going to talk to just anyone." "I know. You think Reverend Pike knows. I think Pike's name is going to come up before long." Martina folded her arms. "That man's a snake in a collar, and folks in this town treat him like a saint." Nico didn't reply. The silence between them held too many thoughts neither wanted to say aloud. She's not going to be okay just because she's safe now, Martina said after a moment. You know that, don't you? I don't expect her to be okay. Good. Because she'll test you. She already is. Martina's eyes softened. But she trusts you a little. He wasn't sure that was true, but she hadn't pulled away. And that mattered. Later, after Martina had gone to bed, and the ranch had gone still, Nico sat in the rocker outside the blue room, listening to the creaks in the walls, the wind in the beams. He couldn't bring himself to leave. Rosie hadn't said a word since Masa. But when he was near, she didn't flinch quite as hard. That was something. Around midnight, a small voice floated through the half-open door. Nico. He was inside the room before the chair stopped rocking. She sat up in bed, bear clutched under her chin, moonlight painting soft silver across her face. Her eyes were wide, glistening. Bad dream, she whispered. Yeah, he crouched beside the bed. Want to tell me about it? She hesitated, then nodded, but it took a long moment before the words came. They put me in the dark room when I was bad. His throat went tight. What kind of room? No windows, she said. No sound. Just wood. Like a box. They locked the top. He swallowed the rage. That won't happen here. You promise, I swear. She blinked a few times. You won't leave, not unless you tell me to. She looked at him a long while as if trying to tell whether he meant it. Then with the tiniest movement, she leaned toward him. He didn't move, didn't reach out. He just stayed still. Rosie rested her forehead against his arm. Not a hug, not a full lean, just contact. Nico stayed that way until her breathing evened out again. When she finally drifted off, he eased her back onto the pillow, pulled the quilt over her legs, and stepped out into the hall. He didn't go back to his own room, just stood outside her door. Somewhere someone had locked that little girl in a box, and if they were still breathing, Nico would find them. The next morning, the sun had barely climbed when the knock came. Not on the door, but the wood gate beyond the fence line. Mateo waved from atop his horse hat, tipped low against the glare. Boss, he called. You might want to see this. Nico stepped onto the porch. What is it? There's a wagon rolling in fast. Dust clouds thick. Could be that preacher. Nico's eyes narrowed. His pulse steadied slow and dangerous. I'll be right there. He looked once more toward the upstairs window. The curtain fluttered slightly, just enough for him to know she was watching. You stay inside, he murmured. I'll handle it. She looked at me like the other lady did, before the hurting. Dust rolled behind the wagon wheels as Nicholas stood at the edge of the corral, squinting toward the road. The late morning sun was already high, burning hot through his shirt. Mateo rode beside the gate, arms folded over the saddle horn, watching the approaching wagon with suspicion etched into every line of his face. The rig came slow now, its earlier urgency fading as it neared the ranch house. Nico clocked the polished black wood, the high-backed seat with embroidered trim, the thin veils tied to the sides to ward off dust. Not a preacher. Worse. Doña Estrella Vargas. She sat primly behind the reins, wearing a wide hat and an expression like sour milk. Two boys Nico didn't recognize rode behind her on horseback, trying to look bored, but glancing around like they were taking inventory. Nico stepped forward as the wagon came to a stop. Señora, he said, flat and cold. Nicolás, she replied, smiling with just her lips. I was passing through and thought I might pay a neighborly visit. We're not neighbors, not in the sense of property lines, perhaps. Her eyes flicked to the main house where the curtain in the upstairs window had just barely moved. But we all belong to the same valley, don't we? Same community. Same God. Nico didn't blink. Say what you came to say. Estrella adjusted her gloves, fingers twitching in practiced poise. I heard about the little acquisition you made at the placement fair. He said nothing. I worry for her, Estrella went on. A man like you, living alone, no woman in the house aside from that bruja cook. You don't get to speak about Doña Martina. Estrella smiled wider. Touchy. Nico stepped closer to the wagon. She's not your concern. Estrella tilted her head. But she might have been. You know how those things go, lists, allocations. Sometimes a child ends up where she wasn't meant to. She's exactly where she's meant to be. I only came to offer help, Estrella said smoothly. I've taken in orphans before, trained them, raised them, given them real structure and guidance. If this proves too much for you, it won't. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him the way someone might examine a chipped teacup. Then her smile dropped. Well, she said, voice hardening. Perhaps it won't matter. Reverend Pike is a stickler for proper documentation. You may find your papers lacking. Nico's jaw tightened. He signed off on that auction. And he may regret it. She flicked the reins, and the wagon creaked forward again. The horses turned dust swirling around the wheels. I'll pray for you, Nicholas, she called over her shoulder. And for the girl. Nico watched them go, the sun catching on the polished wood like it was something holy instead of rotten. Mateo rode up beside him and spit into the dirt. She's sniffing around for blood. She won't get it. Think she's already talked to Pike, I'd bet on it. Mateo looked toward the house. She saw her curtain moved. Rosie's eyes don't miss much. They stood in silence a moment longer before heading inside. Rosie sat on the stairwell when Nico walked through the door, knees hugged tight to her chest. Her face was pale, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. You all right, little one? He asked. She didn't answer, just stared at a spot on the floorboards. He crouched. Talk to me. She looked at me, his brow creased. Who the lady? In the wagon. Nico nodded slowly. She's no one to be afraid of. Rosie shook her head. She looked at me like the other lady did. The one at the orphanage, before they took Maria. Nico felt that name like a cold wind. Who's Maria, my friend? Rosie's voice was barely more than a breath. They came and said she got a new home. But the lady looked at her funny. Like you look at meat, not like you look at kids. What happened to Maria? Rosie stared harder at the floor. She screamed the first night. Then she stopped. They said she ran away. But she didn't. Nico's chest felt like it was caving in. You think this woman Estrella was the same? Rosie nodded, small and solemn. She looked at me the same way. He exhaled slowly and sat beside her on the steps. You're safe now. She's not going to touch you. But she knows. He turned to her. Knows what? That I'm here. That you took me. He nodded. She does. Rosie pulled her legs in tighter, burying her chin in her knees. She'll come back, she whispered. I'll be here when she does. That night, Rosie refused dinner. She sat at the table but pushed the food around with her spoon. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window as if expecting headlights that didn't exist yet. Martina tried soft encouragement. Nico stayed quiet, letting the silence carry what words couldn't. After she'd gone to bed, he sat by the fireplace and stared into the flames. His fingers drummed against the armrest of the chair, slow and steady. They were coming for her. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He couldn't wait to react. He had to find out what was happening. Who else had gone missing? Who else had been placed in homes like Estrella's? The law might not be on his side, but that didn't matter. She was, and that was enough. The next morning before the sun was up, he saddled his horse and rode into town. It was time to speak to someone who'd seen this from the inside, someone who could tell him how deep the rot went, someone who used to be one of them. They always say gentle, and then they hurt you anyway. The sun had barely crested the ridgeline when Nicolas Herrera tied his horse outside the adobe house on the edge of Rio Mora's south bluff. The wooden placard above the lintel was sun-faded, but the name was still etched clean: Dr. Eloisa Galvan, physician and surgeon. Not everyone in town trusted her. Some called her a city woman playing doctor. But those with sense and scars knew better. He knocked once, twice. The door creaked open before his fist met it a third time. "You're early," she said. Dr. Galvan stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, her dark hair twisted back beneath a scarf. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Didn't sleep much," Nico replied. "I figured." She stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled of boiled linen, sage, and ink. Ledgers lay open on the kitchen table beside folded instruments and a stack of correspondence. Eloisa moved a jar of salve aside and poured him a mug of black coffee without asking. "She's about 3 years old," Nico said, gripping the cup. "Won't say much. Barely eats unless she's alone. Flinches at everything." "She's hurt," Eloisa's tone sharpened. Nico nodded. Her back's torn up, scars old and new. "Martina says a belt or strap. And you got her at the placement fair, last one they tried to move. She was bleeding on the platform." He stopped. "I didn't think. I just took her." Eloisa studied him, her eyes too tired for judgment. "You did more than most would. She won't let anyone touch her unless she has to. I figured maybe she'd let you look. If I stay, I can try. She doesn't trust doctors. Most girls like her don't." Eloisa sipped her own cup. "When can you bring her today?" "Good. I'll come to you." Familiar ground helps. Nico stood. "You'll need to see it yourself to believe it." "I already believe it," she said. "But I'll write it down so someone else has to." By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was overhead, and the wind had kicked up dry and restless. Rosie sat in the dirt near the barn, drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. Masa sat beside her, tucked under one arm like a companion watching over her. Martina met them on the porch, arms crossed her face, a carved scowl. "You didn't tell her," she said under her breath. "She's got to know. She's had 2 quiet days." "She needs more than quiet," Nico said. "She needs a record, something that proves what they did." Martina looked toward the barn. "She won't like it." "I know." Eloisa adjusted the strap on her medical bag. "Let me speak to her first." Rosie looked up as they approached. Her eyes went to Nico, then slid to the stranger beside him. "This is Dr. Galvan," he said. "Her name's Eloisa. She's not like the others." Rosie stood slowly, brushing dirt off her legs. She didn't reach for Nico's hand, but moved behind him, peeking around his side like a cautious animal. Eloisa knelt down. "Hi, Rosita." The girl flinched at the name. "I heard you're strong," the doctor continued, "and smart. I want to help, but only if you say yes." Rosie didn't answer. "I'm not going to poke you, not going to cut anything, not going to take anything away. I just want to look at the places that hurt. And you get to decide if I can." Rosie's grip tightened on Nico's shirt. "They always say gentle," she whispered. "And then they hurt you anyway." Nico felt that like a knife. "I won't let her hurt you," he said softly. "You don't even have to be alone. I'll stay the whole time." Rosie's eyes flicked between them. She looked at Eloisa's hands, open still, then at the bag, then at Nico. Okay, she said barely. Inside, Martina had set up a chair in the blue room and lit the stove for warmth. The quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Rosie climbed up without being asked, clutching Masa so tightly the bear's seams stretched white. I'm going to lift your nightgown, Mija, Eloisa said gently. Just to look. No one's going to touch your skin but me, and only with my hands. If anything hurts you, tell me and I stop. You believe me? Rosie stared at the floor, then gave the faintest nod. Nico sat across from her elbows on his knees, watching every move. When Eloisa peeled the fabric up, the silence in the room grew thick. The scars were worse under daylight. Lines crossed lines like someone had taken their time. Some faded into white, others still raw. Eloisa's face went pale. Her hands trembled just once, then steadied as she reached for her notebook. These are not discipline marks, she said quietly. They're too precise, too frequent. This is ritualized. What does that mean? Nico asked, his voice low. It means someone did this on purpose, more than once, over a long period of time. She touched none of the marks directly. Just sketched the layout in her notes, measured the distances, took quiet inventory. May I check your legs, Rosita? She asked. Rosie nodded again. She didn't cry, didn't move, just stared blankly at the far wall while Eloisa worked. She's dissociating, the doctor murmured to Nico. She's trained herself to vanish inside. How do we stop that time, Eloisa said. And safety. And someone to keep the wolves away. When she finished, she covered Rosie back up and stepped out, signaling with a tilt of her head. Nico followed her to the hallway. I'll have my report written by morning, she said. It's not just the abuse, it's the pattern. The signs of psychological conditioning. She wasn't just beaten. She was groomed not to cry, not to fight. Can you testify to that? I can. Nico exhaled. Thank you. She trusts you, Eloisa said, nodding toward the door. That's a gift. Don't waste it. After she left, Nico came back in. Rosie was still sitting on the bed, staring at the window. He crouched beside her. You did real good, sweetheart. She blinked slowly. Will it help? I think so. She looked down at Masa, rubbed a thumb across one of his ears. She said, I'm strong. You are. Rosie looked up at him. Her eyes were wet now. Then why did they still hurt me? He didn't have an answer. He took her hand gently. Because there's something broken in them. Not in you. She let herself lean against his shoulder just for a moment. In the barn later that afternoon, Mateo appeared with a worried look. You got a visitor, he said. Says he knew the girl. From the orphanage. Nico narrowed his eyes. Who name's Luis Tenorio? Says he was there when she arrived. Rosie stood just inside the stall, brushing the mare's flank with slow strokes. She turned at the name. Her face didn't change, but her eyes went still. She knew him. She hasn't said a word, just got quiet. Nico closed the stall door gently. Keep an eye on her. He stepped outside into the sun where a teenager leaned against the fence, arms crossed, clothes threadbare. His eyes were sharp, wary. I came because I heard you took her, the boy said. Nico folded his arms. You, Luis. The boy nodded. I knew her before, back when she didn't have a name. She never cried, not even when they took her behind the curtain. Luis Tenorio didn't move from the fence, but his jaw shifted slightly as Nicholas stepped closer. His clothes were worn, stitched at the shoulders and knees, but his eyes were sharp, alive, in a way that said he'd had to stay that way to survive. I came because I heard she made it out, Luis said, his voice steady but low. The quiet one. They called her Ghost sometimes. Like she wasn't all the way there. She goes by Rosie now, Nico replied. And she's not a ghost. Luis looked toward the barn, then at the ranch house behind them. His mouth twitched like he was trying to decide whether to speak or run. I didn't hurt her, he said quickly. I didn't touch her, I swear. But I saw things, and I didn't stop them. Nico watched him a moment, then nodded toward the porch. Come talk. Inside, Martina poured 2 mugs of water but said nothing. She glanced at Luis, eyes narrowed before stepping out to the kitchen. Nico sat arms crossed, waiting. Luis didn't sit right away. He paced instead slow, like testing the ground beneath him. I was there 2 years he started. Got placed twice. Both times I ran back. Reverend Pike said I was broken. Said boys like me didn't deserve more than chores and cold beds. Nico didn't interrupt. They brought her in middle of the night, Luis said. Carried, not walking. Wrapped in a coat like something fragile. She didn't talk. Wouldn't even look at anyone. How long ago? 5, 6 months, maybe. He finally sat, gripping the mug tight. She was different. Real small, but she watched everything. Didn't blink much. Ate like she wasn't sure it was allowed. Nico's gut twisted. There was this back room, Luis continued. They said it was for punishment, but sometimes kids came out different. Quieter. Like part of them stayed in there. Rosie's voice echoed in Nico's mind. No windows. No sound. Like a box. She got taken behind the curtain after she bit Mr. Clay's hand, Luis said. That man liked the girls scared. He'd smile when they cried. But Rosie never did. Not once. You saw them take her? Luis nodded. More than once. She never cried, not even when they took her behind the curtain. What about Maria? Nico asked quietly. Luis looked up, eyes wide. You know that name, she told me. Luis swallowed hard. They said Maria ran off, that she took food and disappeared. But I was in the cellar when I heard the yelling. Then it went quiet. Too quiet. Did you ever see her again? Not her. Not her dress. Nothing. Nico leaned forward. Do you think she's dead? Luis hesitated. I think if she was alive, she'd have come back for Rosie. Silence stretched between them. Why come now? Nico asked. Luis looked down at his hands. Because I heard Estrella Vargas was sniffing around again. And if she's involved, things are worse than I thought. You know her, she visited once a month. Always left with one kid. Said she ran a home for waywards. But the ones she took, we didn't hear from again. Not letters, not rumors, nothing. Nico rubbed his face. You can testify to this, I can talk. But they won't listen to me. I've got no family, no title, no clean past. Just dirt under my nails and a bunch of bad memories. They'll listen if I'm standing next to you. Luis tilted his head. Why do you care so much? Because I've seen what they did to her. And because someone needs to burn that whole damn house down. Luis gave a half smile, not joyful, more like a man finally recognizing another of his kind. Then we'll do it together. They shook on it, quiet and firm. In the barn, Rosie stood at the stall door, listening. She hadn't meant to, not at first. But when she saw Luis step off the horse, and her chest tightened in that old, familiar way, she stayed hidden behind the feed barrels, listening. He sounded different now. Not mean, not sharp. Just scared like she used to be. She brushed her hand over Masa's torn ear, the stitching warm from her fingers. Luis was the only one who shared bread, she whispered. He got hit for it. The mare bumped her shoulder gently, and she rested her cheek against the animal's neck. It was strange to hear her past spoken out loud. Stranger still to know someone else remembered it too. She hadn't imagined it. That night, Nico knocked softly on the blue room door. Rosie was sitting by the window, legs drawn up beneath her nightgown, staring out at the stars. "Can I come in?" She nodded. He sat on the rug by her feet. "Luis told me some things. About what happened. About you." Her fingers curled around the windowsill. "You don't have to talk," he said. "But I want you to know something. What they did to you, to those other kids, it wasn't your fault. And it's not done yet. We're going to make them answer for it." She looked down at him, her face blank, but her eyes burning. "He remembered me." "Yes." She took a long breath, like it hurt to fill her lungs. "Then maybe it's real." "What is that?" I got out. "You did." She looked away, but the others didn't, not yet. Rosie leaned her head against the glass. "I want to help." Nico's breath caught. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, "but I don't want to hide anymore." He stood slowly and crossed to her. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." She turned and looked up at him. "Even if it's hard?" He nodded. "Especially then." A knock echoed from the porch below, 3 sharp raps, too precise to be anything but official. Rosie froze. Nico looked toward the hallway. "Stay here." Her fingers clutched the curtain. "Be careful." He gave her a small nod before heading down the stairs, boots heavy on the steps. At the front door, Mateo stood stiff as a fence post. "It's them," he said. "Deputies." Behind him, 2 men stood in wide-brimmed hats and long coats. One held a folded document. The other had his hand resting just a little too close to his holster. "You Nicolas Herrera?" the taller one asked. "I am. We've received a formal petition for custody review. Reverend Pike and Mrs. Vargas claim you've taken a child without lawful authorization." Nico didn't flinch. "I've got signed placement papers." Still, the man said, unfolding the document. "Court date's been scheduled. 1 week from today. You're to appear in Santa Rosa." Mateo's jaw tightened. "That far?" the deputy nodded. "Until then, she stays under your care. But if she disappears or is found harmed, you'll answer for it." Nico took the paper without blinking. "She won't disappear," he said. "And she sure as hell won't be harmed." The deputy tipped his hat and turned. As the horses trotted off, dust rising behind them, Nico stood alone on the porch, the summons clenched in his fist. Inside upstairs, a child with a scarred back and steel in her heart listened to the hoofbeats fade into the dark. Court don't care who loves her. It only cares who owns her. The kettle screamed just as Nicholas finished pacing his 3rd lap around the kitchen. Martina yanked it off the stove with a huff, poured water into a chipped mug, and dropped in a sprig of yerba buena. The silence between them had grown taut, stretched by 7 days of preparing and pretending everything might not fall apart. She asked if she had to dress nice, Martina said without looking up. Said she heard judges like bows. Nico's hands curled into fists. "She's 3. Martina set the mug down hard enough for it to slosh. "Tell that to the law." Luis sat at the far end of the table, shoulders hunched, fingers picking at a thread in his sleeve. "You think they'll ask her questions? I hope not," Nico said. "But they might." "She can't lie," Luis muttered. "Not even to protect herself." "She shouldn't have to." Martina sat down and looked straight at Nico. "What if they take her?" The room went still. Nico didn't answer right away. He picked up the mug, drank the bitter tea, and forced the burn down his throat. "They won't," he said. "They can't." "Don't confuse can't with won't," Martina replied. "You're going up against the church, the richest widow in the valley, and a system that don't give a damn about poor girls with no kin." Nico pushed away from the table and stepped out into the yard. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was soft gray at the edges. In the barn he found Rosie curled up in the hayloft, beside the old cat stroking its fur with careful fingers. "You cold?" he asked. She shook her head, then looked down at him. "You mad?" he frowned. "Why would I be mad? I heard yelling." "That wasn't yelling, Corazon. That was grown-ups being scared." She came down the ladder slowly, still barefoot, still silent. When she reached the bottom, she tugged at the hem of her nightgown. "If I wear the yellow dress, will it help what the judge? Maybe if I look nice, he won't send me back." Nico knelt in front of her. "You could wear a feed sack, and you'd still belong here. What you wear doesn't change what's true." She nodded like she understood, but her face didn't soften. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." She touched the bruise on her forearm absently. "If they make me go back, will you come find me?" He cupped her cheek. "They're not taking you anywhere. You're mine now." She blinked. Like family, exactly like that. Later that morning, they rode out together. Nico, Rosie, Martina, and Luis packed tight into the wagon dust rising behind them as they headed toward Santa Rosa. The courthouse loomed taller than Rosie expected, all square edges and stone, the kind of place where voices went quiet and feet dragged. Inside, the waiting room smelled like old books and varnish. People stared when they entered: a cowboy with a scar on his cheek, a cook in a woven shawl, a barefoot girl holding a bear with one torn ear. The bailiff looked them up and down before announcing Herrera versus Pike custody hearing, Judge Calderon presiding. They entered the courtroom to find Estrella Vargas already seated in the front row, fanning herself, delicately veil tucked just so beneath her chin. Reverend Pike sat beside her, his collar sharp, his Bible open like he needed it to breathe. Rosie flinched at the sight of him. Nico felt her grip tighten on his hand and gave her 2 firm squeezes. They sat together at the front table. Eloisa Galvan was already there, leather folder on the bench notes arranged with surgical precision. She gave Rosie a small nod. The child nodded back. Judge Calderon entered without fanfare. An older man, sun-worn and grave-eyed, he didn't look up as he opened the file on his desk. "This is a temporary custody hearing," he said, "not a trial. We are here to assess fitness and determine the child's best interest." Estrella rose smoothly. "Your Honor, I represent a home certified by the Holy Heart Orphanage and supported by the Church's Placement Council. I've raised 5 children through this very system," Nico cut in. "Only 4 are on record. The 5th, Maria Gutierrez, was never accounted for after you took her." A low murmur stirred. Calderon looked up. "Do you have evidence of this?" Luis stood. His voice shook, but not from fear. "I knew Maria. I knew Rosie. I saw them both inside that place. I saw what they did. I saw what they didn't stop." Calderon motioned for him to sit. "Your statement is noted." Eloisa stood next. "I'm Dr. Eloisa Galvan. I examined the child. Her injuries are not only consistent with chronic abuse, but point toward methodical conditioning punishment that left no room for healing." "She's had time to injure herself," Pike said suddenly, voice low and calm. "Some children do, especially those troubled from birth." Rosie's breath caught. Nico stood immediately. "She's not troubled. She's traumatized." Calderon raised a hand. "Mr. Herrera, control yourself," I am Nico said. "Barely." Calderon flipped through the medical file, the affidavits, the photographs. The courtroom stayed dead silent as the judge read. Then finally he looked to Rosie. "I don't make it a habit to speak to children in hearings like this. But the law says if a child is capable of expressing preference, I must listen." He looked at her gently. Do you understand, Rosita? You don't have to say anything, but if you want to tell me where you feel safe, I will hear it. Rosie looked down at Massa, then at Pike, then at Nico. She stood. The room held its breath. She walked slowly to the front of the room, her feet scuffing the floor. She stopped beside the judge's desk, hands behind her back. My name is Rosie, she said quietly. Not ghost. Not it. Not trouble. Calderon nodded. Okay. I don't like the box. I don't like the curtain. I don't like when people touch without asking. Do you feel safe with Mr. Herrera? She turned toward Nico. Her voice caught, but her back stayed straight. He makes the light stay on when I'm scared. He doesn't lie with his mouth or his hands. He fixed my bear. He sits outside my door so I don't have to check. Her voice trembled then. He doesn't own me, but he keeps me. Judge Calderon closed the file. No further testimony is required. Estrella stood abruptly. Your Honor, you will sit, Calderon snapped. I've heard enough. This child is not property. She is not a placement. She is a person. He turned back to Rosie. Go sit down, sweetheart. She nodded once, then walked straight to Nico and crawled into his lap without hesitation. The judge signed the paper with a firm hand. Custody awarded to Nicolas Herrera. Full guardianship pending formal review. This court is adjourned. Pike left without a word. Estrella's veil fluttered as she turned chin high, but her lips pressed tight. Outside, Rosie blinked in the sun, face upturned. Do we go home now? She asked. Nico picked her up, held her tight to his chest. We never left, he said. Some things can't be forgiven, but they can be faced. The wind smelled like dry grass and coming rain as they crossed back into the valley. Dust clung to the wagon wheels and creaked in the boards beneath them, but no one spoke. Not for the first hour, not for the second. Even Rosie sat quiet between Nicolas and Martina, arms wrapped around Massa, her thumb tracing the mended seam of his belly over and over. Nico drove with one hand on the reins and the other resting protectively on Rosie's knee. Luis rode behind them on Mateo's horse face set and unreadable, his eyes flicking to the tree line now and then, like he expected something to jump out. The courthouse hadn't broken them, but it hadn't ended anything either. Justice, Nico thought, wasn't a stamp on a paper. It was a wound that still bled just slower now. When they reached the ranch, Martina climbed down first, groaning at the stiffness in her legs. She grabbed Rosie's bag and held it out to her, but the girl didn't move. You all right, Misha? She asked. Rosie stared at the barn. Her voice, when it came, was flat. Someone's been here. Nico turned sharply. What she pointed. Gates open, he hadn't noticed. But now he saw it. The side gate never used hung half open, the latch splintered like it had been forced. Luis swung off the horse, moving toward the barn with cautious steps. Nico jumped down Rosie, still in his arms, and handed her to Martina. Stay back, he said. Take her inside. Martina didn't argue. She pulled Rosie close and turned toward the house. Nico followed Luis to the barn. The door creaked on its hinges as they pushed it open. Nothing looked stolen, but something was wrong. The feed sacks had been moved. A tin cup lay dented in the straw, and in the corner, etched into the dirt floor, was a cross. Nico crouched beside it. This wasn't here before. Luis swallowed hard. It's their mark. The ones who worked with Estrella. Religious pretend to be. They use the cross to claim what they think belongs to them. Nico stood, fists clenched. They came while we were gone. To scare you, Luis said, or warn you. They made a mistake. Later that evening, the tension never left the house. Even as the stove filled the kitchen with the scent of simmering beans and roasted chiles, the warmth didn't reach past their shoulders. Nico kept checking the windows. Luis cleaned his boots twice. Martina laid her knives out beside the bread like it was habit, not paranoia. Rosie sat on the couch in the parlor drawing in a small notebook Nico had bought her on the way home. She wasn't drawing flowers like before, or animals, just faces. The same face over and over. Nico sat beside her, leaning close. "Who's that?" She didn't look up. The man from the curtain. He went still. The one who made the others watch. Watch what, Rosie? Her pencil paused. She looked at him slowly. Punishments, when we didn't obey. Nico's stomach turned, but he stayed quiet, let her keep going. They said it made us strong, like Jesus. That's not what strong means. She shrugged. He took the notebook gently. You don't have to remember him. Not if you don't want to. I have to. She looked up at him, eyes suddenly bright. Because he's still out there. Nico nodded. Okay, then we'll find him. Together. That night, the wind shifted. Nico couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle eyes scanning the dark. Somewhere across the hills, a coyote howled low and lonesome. Luis sat beside him, chewing a piece of jerky like it was all that tethered him to the present. They won't stop, Luis said finally. Not till something bigger scares them. We'll be that something. Luis snorted. You believe that I have to. Inside, Martina moved through the house like a ghost, locking windows, placing salt at the thresholds. Old habits. Older fears. In the blue room, Rosie slept with the lamp burning. She'd asked for it. Nico had promised. The shadows couldn't touch her, not while the light stayed on. But the shadows weren't just inside her dreams. They were coming. Nico could feel it in the way the wind bit colder now, in the way birds avoided the barn, in the way the cross in the dirt had felt like a warning. He went inside, just before dawn, made coffee, watched the sky lighten through the kitchen window. When Martina came in, she said nothing. Just poured herself a mug and stood beside him. Galvan sent word last night, she said. Nico looked up. She got a letter. From someone claiming to know what Estrella's been hiding. Who she didn't say in the letter. Said it's safer to come in person. When tomorrow. Nico nodded slowly. Martina took a sip. You ready for whatever comes? I have to be. She looked at him hard. This ain't just about Rosie anymore. I know. It's about all of them. He nodded again. And we're not backing down. Martina's eyes softened just a little. Good. From upstairs came a soft creak. Rosie stood in the hallway, masa clutched in one hand, the other rubbing her eyes. I smelled coffee, she mumbled. Martina went to her, lifting her into her arms. You want breakfast, Nina? Rosie rested her head on Martina's shoulder. Can I draw first? Martina smiled. Of course you can. As they disappeared into the parlor, Nico stood alone, eyes still fixed on the hills beyond the barn. They'd tried to scare him, but they'd forgotten one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. She's not broken. She's waiting for someone to believe she never was. The storm rolled in fast black clouds, bruising the horizon, wind curling up through the valley, like it carried a grudge. Nicholas stood by the barn, sleeves rolled up, watching the sky with a farmer's instincts and a fighter's wariness. He didn't mind weather. What worried him were things that hid inside it. Rosie stood at the window in the blue room, her breath fogging the glass. She liked storms, she'd said once. They were loud, but they didn't lie. You knew when they were coming. You felt them in your bones. Behind her on the floor, scattered pages showed drawings in charcoal houses with no doors, children with eyes too wide, crosses burning in corners. And one drawing, tucked carefully beneath the rug, a face shadowed and cruel, drawn over and over until the paper ripped. Martina was kneading dough when the knock came. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. She froze. Nico turned from the barn, hand instinctively brushing the pistol at his hip. Luis appeared in the doorway of the shed, eyes narrowing. The knock came again. Nico opened the door slowly. Dr. Galvan stood there, soaked from the storm scarf clinging to her throat, one hand wrapped tight around a leather satchel. "I didn't want to wait," she said. Inside, Martina handed her a towel, while Luis stoked the fire. Rosie peeked from behind the hall curtain, but didn't come forward. Nico noticed the way Eloisa scanned the corners of the room, checking shadows before she sat. "You said you got a letter," Nico prompted. "I did. No return address. Just a page and a name. But it's one I recognized." Eloisa set the satchel on the table and drew out a folded envelope. The paper was thin, crinkled, almost translucent. Her fingers trembled as she passed it to Nico. He opened it carefully. In blocky, uneven script, "Ask the Undertaker in Esperanza." He kept the ledgers. He saw the girls. Name's Abraham Duval. Underneath, scrawled in a different hand, almost like a signature. "She's not broken. She's waiting for someone to believe she never was." Nico read it twice, then a third time. Martina leaned in. "You trust it? I trust whoever wrote that second line," Nico said. Luis nodded slowly. "That's what Maria used to say, about Rosie." Eloisa took a breath. "Esperanza's 2 days south. Small border town. Quiet. If Duval's still there, he might have records, names, placements, payments. Proof. Enough to bring it all down," Nico asked. "Maybe, if we move fast." Rosie stepped into the room, barefoot, her eyes on the letter. "Can I come?" she asked. Everyone turned to her. "No," Nico said gently. "It's not safe. I know him." "Duval," she shook her head. "The man with the burn on his neck. He gave Maria candy once. Said it was for being brave. But she cried after, and he laughed." Nico crouched. "You remember his name?" She nodded slowly. "Samir. He wore a red handkerchief, smelled like smoke." Luis let out a breath. "I saw him too. He used to drive the wagons for Estrella." "That's a start," Nico said. "If we find Duval, we might find where Samir went." Rosie looked at him, searching his face for something. "You'll come back always." She stepped forward and hugged him tight, sudden. The first time she'd done it without being asked or encouraged. Nico closed his eyes for a second, held her close. "She's not broken," he murmured into her hair. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. That night, they packed light. Martina laid out dried meat, hard cheese bread, wrapped in waxed cloth. Luis polished the rifle he'd taken from his father's old ranch, the one they'd sold when the bank came calling. Rosie stayed up late, watching from the window, hugging Masa until his seams bent again. "You'll protect her while I'm gone," Nico told Martina. "With my life," she said. "But hurry back. She won't rest till you do." By morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky stayed heavy. Nico and Luis mounted their horses and rode out before the sun fully broke the horizon, dust trailing them like ghosts, too tired to keep up. Rosie stood on the porch barefoot despite the wet, her hair tangled from sleep. She didn't wave, but she watched until they were gone. In Esperanza, the wind blew different, saltier, with the whisper of something not quite right. It was a town built on trade and silence, the kind of place where folks minded their business, even if that business bled. They found the undertaker's shop on the corner near the chapel. The windows were shuttered, paint peeling on the door. Nico knocked once. A long pause. Then the door creaked open. A thin man with gray skin and sunken eyes blinked at them from behind spectacles. Duval Nico asked. That's me. We need your help. The man opened the door wider. Come in, but don't touch anything. Inside smelled like formaldehyde and old guilt. Shelves lined with books, rows of ledgers stacked like tombstones. Nico explained quickly Estrella, the orphanage, the transfers, the missing girls. Duval listened, expression unreadable. Then he moved to a drawer, pulled out a thick black binder, and dropped it on the table. I wrote down everything he said, every delivery, every payment, every false name. I didn't know what they were doing at first, but by the time I did... He looked at his hands. Why'd you keep it? Luis asked. Because someone needed to, and because I couldn't stop seeing their faces. He turned the book to a page near the back. There, written in faded ink, Maria Gutierrez, delivered to Estrella Vargas, confirmed pickup Samir Reyes, date March 2nd. Nico clenched his jaw. Do you know where Reyes went? Duval nodded slowly. Arizona border, south of Tucson. There's a ranch he visits, not his own, belongs to someone else. Rich, untouchable. But I marked the route. He pulled out a map, folded brittle, annotated in red pencil. Nico took it, tucking it carefully into his coat. You'll testify, he asked. Duval hesitated. They'll kill me. They might try. But I'll keep you safe. I'm not worried about me, Duval said. I'm worried about the ones still left behind. Nico met his eyes. Then let's get them out. Back in the saddle riding north again, Nico looked toward the horizon. The storm behind them had passed, but the real one was still waiting. They had names now. Places, routes, a way in. And this time they weren't coming just to protect one child. They were coming to burn the whole damn house down. Some places weren't meant to be left standing. The air changed the moment they crossed into Arizona. It wasn't just the heat, though, that came too thick and weighty like a hand on the chest. It was the silence. Not quiet, but a different kind of hush. The kind that settled over places where wrong things had happened, and no one had ever named them aloud. Nicholas rode ahead, the map tucked beneath his vest. The red pencil trail burned into his memory. Luis trailed behind eyes, sweeping the edges of the mesquite brush, one hand on his rifle sling, the other near the knife at his boot. Their horses moved slow and steady, as if they too knew the land didn't trust easy. According to Duval, the Reyes drop site wasn't a real ranch, not on paper. No brand, no posted name. Just a swath of dusty land with high fences and a white house tucked into the base of a bluff. No neighbors for miles. No road signs pointing the way. Nico didn't need signs. He followed the terrain, and by mid-afternoon they saw it. The bluff rose up like a fist cracked and weathered. At its base, a two-story house pale as bone with an empty corral and a barn that looked too clean for the dust around it. The house sat too still. No livestock, no children playing, just the hum of something wrong. They tied the horses a mile out and hiked the last stretch on foot, keeping low, watching every window. Luis spotted the sentry, first a man perched behind the chimney rifle resting across his knees. We go now, we're meat, he whispered. Then we wait. They watched for hours. Shift changes. Who walked where? The sound of dogs, but no sign of barking. Too trained, too quiet. Nico counted 3 men outside. 2 more crossed through the barn. Maybe 1 in the house. Maybe more. Reyes wasn't there. Not yet. As the sun dipped, Nico turned to Luis. We do this clean, fast. Get the girl. Get proof. Get out. Luis nodded. And if it gets loud, Luis smiled tight and cold. Then we make it count. They waited until full dark. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the faint scent of kerosene from somewhere near the barn. Luis moved first, crawling along the fence line, cutting through a gap between two posts. Nico followed every step, deliberate. They reached the barn wall. Voices inside. A girl cried out, muffled. Nico's chest clenched. He glanced at Luis, who nodded and reached for the latch. They burst in together, Luis through the side, Nico from the rear stall. One guard stood near a cage rifle slung loose. Another leaned against a feed barrel. Both looked up, too late. Luis dropped the first with a boot to the throat and a crack of bone. Nico slammed the butt of his pistol into the other's jaw. The man dropped, groaning. Nico moved to the cage. A girl huddled in the corner, no older than 7, cheeks streaked with dirt, wrists chafed from rope. She stared at him, wild-eyed. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "My name's Nico. I'm here to get you out." She didn't speak. He reached into his coat and pulled out Masa, the spare bear Rosie had given him. "This belongs to someone like you. She told me to give it to whoever needed it most." The girl stared at the bear, then at him. Slowly she crawled forward. He lifted her out, cradling her like he had Rosie that first night. Luis dragged the groaning man into the shadows. "We're not done." "We don't need more," Nico said. "We need Reyes." Nico nodded, jaw tight. "Then we wait." They holed up in the barn. The girl, her name was Luz, she whispered, clung to Nico, silent but alert. Luis covered the window with hay, leaving a narrow slit to watch. Just after midnight, headlights cut across the bluff. A truck pulled up. 3 men climbed out. One had a limp, another had a burn across his neck. Nico stiffened. "Samir," he said. Luis exhaled. "That's him." They waited until the men went inside the house. Then Nico handed Luz to Luis. "Take her back to the horses, ride to Esperanza, find Galvan, get her safe. What about you? I'm going in." Luis looked at him like he wanted to argue, then nodded. "Don't die. Not planning on it." Nico watched him disappear into the dark, then turned back toward the house. The porch groaned under his boots as he climbed the steps. The front door was cracked open. He slipped in. Inside, the air was colder, too clean, like bleach and money. He moved room by room, library, kitchen, hall. Voices rose from the cellar. He followed them. Wood stairs creaked under his weight. He crouched low, pressing to the wall. A single light bulb swung overhead, casting jagged shadows. Samir stood near a table, flipping through a ledger. Another man leaned in the doorway, broad, bald tattoos curling up his throat. "Still no sign of the others?" Samir asked. "No. But the girl's gone. They'll come. They always do." Nico stepped forward, pistol raised. "You're right." The bald man spun. Samir reached for his coat. Too slow. Nico fired once into the wall behind Samir's head. Both froze. Hands up. Samir raised his slowly. "You don't know what you're walking into. I know enough. I know what you did to Maria, to Rosie, to Luz. You can't prove anything." Nico stepped closer. "That's the difference between you and me. I don't need proof to make you stop breathing." The bald man lunged. Nico fired twice. One hit the shoulder. The other found the man's leg. He dropped, groaning. Samir stumbled back, hands still raised. "You'll hang for this." "Maybe. But not before you pay." Nico grabbed the ledger off the table, stuffed it into his coat. "Tell Vargas we're coming," he said. Then he turned and walked out, slow and deliberate. By the time he reached the bluff, Luis was waiting with an extra horse. "You got it?" Luis asked. Nico held up the ledger. "And Reyes, he'll live. Barely." They rode through the dark, the wind behind them, the dawn still a promise on the horizon. Some places weren't meant to be left standing, and this time they wouldn't. Truth doesn't need a stage, it just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. The ledger sat heavy on the kitchen table, its spine-cracked corners curled like old bark. Nicholas hadn't opened it yet. No one had. Martina brewed coffee, her movements sharper than usual. Rosie sat beside Luis, curled up on a cushion thumb hooked in the worn ear of Masa. Her eyes flicked between the grown-ups like she was trying to read their silence. Galvan stood at the window, arms crossed, watching dust roll in from the west. Luce sat across from her, smaller than she looked in the barn, her eyes still wary. She hadn't spoken since they brought her home, but she hadn't cried either. "We read it together," Nico said finally. "Every page." Martina pulled a chair closer, her jaw set. "You sure you want her here for it?" Rosie looked up, calm. "I already know." Nico didn't argue. He flipped the ledger open. The first few pages were dry columns of dates, locations, initials. It looked like freight manifests. But then came the names. Dozens sorted by age, gender, and destination. Every name had a code. Every code linked to either a place or a person. Luis leaned over. "That's the symbol they branded on the trunks," he said. "I remember it. A triangle with a line through it. Means property held in trust," Galvan said. "It's used in private child exchanges. Keeps them out of the legal system." Martina's hand balled into a fist, like cattle. They turned pages. There was Maria's name circled twice in red ink. Rosie's too, but under a different name, G91 female mute unplaced hold until compliant. Nico's mouth went dry. "This is enough to get federal eyes," Galvan said. "Trafficking, conspiracy, forgery." Luis pointed to the side margin. "That's Pike's handwriting." "How do you know?" Martina asked. "He used to make us copy sermons every Sunday. I'd recognize that bastard's loops anywhere." Nico turned to the last page. They're scrawled in black: transfer orders scheduled. Final phase. Clean the records. Prepare disposal. Silence dropped like a stone. "Disposal!" Martina said, voice hard. Galvan leaned forward, reading again. Could mean destroying evidence. Or worse. "No," Nico said, standing. "We're not waiting." "What's the move?" Louis asked. "We go public. We take this to Judge Calderon, to the press, to anyone who'll listen." "You think they'll care?" Martina asked. "They'll care when we put it in their hands, in front of cameras." Galvan nodded. "And you'll need more than just this book. You'll need faces. Testimonies." "I'll talk," Rosie said. Nico looked at her, startled. "I want to," she said. "Even if it's hard." He knelt beside her. "You don't have to. I do." She looked down at Luce, for her, for Maria. Luce's eyes flickered. Martina reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over Rosie's. "Then we do it on your terms. Your way." Galvan reached into her bag and pulled out a recorder. "We start here. Quiet. Then we go bigger." That afternoon they recorded Rosie's voice for the first time. She spoke in slow sentences, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. She didn't look at the recorder. She looked at Nico. He had a room with no windows. It was blue inside. Not nice blue. Cold blue. She paused. He'd make you kneel. He'd say, "If you cry, God hears it." But then he'd smile, because he wanted God to hear. Martina swallowed hard. Luis turned away, jaw tight. "I didn't cry. I just bit my lip, until it bled." Galvan's hand shook as she pressed stop. "That's enough for now." But Rosie didn't stop. There were others, some smaller than me, some who didn't wake up right. Galvan clicked the recorder back on. They made us sit quiet when someone disappeared. No questions, no noise. They said that's how you stay holy. "What did you believe?" Galvan asked. Rosie looked up at her, fierce. that I was never holy, but I wasn't dirty either. When she was done, Luce whispered something for the first time. I saw her cry, the girl before me. Nico turned to her gently. What was her name, I don't know. Luce's voice was high-thin. She had a braid. They pulled it. Rosie slid off the chair, walked across the floor, and sat beside her. Luce leaned into her just slightly. They'll come for us, Luce whispered. No, Rosie said. Not anymore. The next morning, they left for Santa Rosa with the ledger and the recordings packed in a battered case. Galvan drove her truck Nico beside her. Rosie sat between them with Masa tucked into her belt like a badge. Luis and Martina stayed behind with Luce. Someone had to guard the house. The drive was quiet, heavy with what waited ahead. Nico turned to Rosie once. You scared? She nodded. You want to stop? She shook her head. I want them to see my face. He looked out the window, blinked hard. In town, the courthouse looked smaller than before. Less threatening. Maybe because now they weren't the ones on trial. Galvan led them up the steps past wide-eyed clerks and muttering officers. Calderon was in his chambers. He blinked at the sight of Rosie and stood. I remember you, he said gently. You did well. She nodded. Galvan placed the ledger on his desk, like she was laying down evidence at a crime scene. It's all here. Names, routes, witnesses, and voices. She pulled out the recorder, pressed play. Rosie's voice filled the room. The judge didn't move. His jaw clenched. He reached for his pen before the tape finished playing. We'll need warrants, protection details, press conference too. I'll talk to them, Nico said. So will I, Rosie added. Calderon nodded. It's time the whole world heard it. As they left the office, reporters were already gathering on the steps. Word traveled fast in a town that pretended not to hear. Galvan paused. You sure you're ready? Rosie stepped into the light, chin high. I've been ready. I was just waiting for someone to believe me. They don't get to pretend they didn't know anymore. The town square had never seen anything like it. By noon, camera crews cluttered the courthouse steps. Microphones in every language, wires snaking like nervous roots. Curious onlookers lined the sidewalk. A few held signs, a few held silence. And high above it all, the courthouse clock ticked steadily, as if time didn't care what was being revealed below. Nicolas stood beside Rosie, just off to the right of the podium, sweat beading at the back of his neck, though the wind had picked up. She was small in her pale blue dress, hair pulled back, fingers tight around Masa's paw, but her eyes never wavered. Judge Calderon cleared his throat at the mic. Today we're not here to talk about politics, or damage control, or image. We're here because children were taken, used, sold, and for too long good people looked the other way. Flashes lit up from the press row. Rosie flinched, but held her ground. Calderon continued. We have in our possession a ledger detailing over 70 children, trafficked through a private orphanage and its affiliates. We have eyewitness accounts. We have survivors. He stepped aside. Galvan took the podium. She didn't bother with notes. This is not an isolated crime. This is not the work of one woman or one reverend or one transport driver. This is a network built on silence, protected by wealth and the pretense of faith. She paused. But the silence ends today. She stepped down. A few reporters shouted questions. Most went ignored. Then Rosie stepped forward. For a moment, everything slowed. Nico felt his heart stumble in his chest. Rosie didn't reach for the mic. She just spoke loud enough to be heard. I lived in that house, the one with no windows. They told me I was lucky to be chosen, that God had a plan for me, that love meant obeying. A rustle moved through the crowd. She looked up steady. I want everyone to know that wasn't love. That was fear. And we were just kids. Not lessons, not tests. Just kids. Then she stepped back. No one said a word for several seconds. And then a woman in the back began to cry. Softly, then louder. Her hand pressed to her mouth. Another voice followed. Then another. A ripple. And then applause, not loud, not theatric, but real. That afternoon, arrests began. 2 marshals escorted Estrella Vargas out of her home in broad daylight. She didn't protest, didn't shout. But she didn't lower her head either. Her veil flapped in the breeze like defiance. Reverend Pike went quieter. They found him in a church basement, hands ink-stained, trying to burn ledgers that mirrored the one Nico had handed over. He muttered scripture as they pulled him out. He looked older than he had in court. Smaller. Samir Reyes was already in federal custody. And Duval's testimony, recorded, notarized, distributed to press, sealed the circle. But justice didn't end with names and cuffs. It spilled into backrooms and city offices. Parents came forward, some in anger, some in shame. Survivors older now sent letters, left voicemails, showed up in person. One woman, nearly 30, arrived barefoot, carrying her baptismal dress in a grocery bag. They said I was God's mistake, she told the reporters. Turns out they were. Back at the ranch, things moved slower. Martina kept the hearth warm. Luis repaired the fence line. Galvan stayed 2 extra days to train the local officers on trauma-sensitive interviews. And Luz started talking. Not all at once. Not in full sentences, but enough. She said she liked the way the flour puffed up when you kneaded dough. She liked the smell of wet dirt. She said the sound of wind at night didn't scare her anymore because now she knew who was on the porch. She called Martina Tia without being asked. And once, after a nightmare, she crept into Rosie's room and whispered, "If I hold your hand, can I dream of something else?" Nico watched all this quietly, repairing the back hinge of the barn door, his hands calloused and sure. He still kept the rifle nearby, just in case. But the weight in his chest had changed. Less fear, more purpose. One evening, as the sun folded itself into the hills, Rosie came to him with the drawings. "Do we have to keep all of them?" she asked. He looked at the faces, some scrawled in anger, some blurred by tears. "Which ones do you want to keep?" She flipped to a new page, drew a house, a barn, a woman holding a tray of pan dulce, a man sitting on the porch, guitar in hand, 2 girls, one tall, one small, facing the sun. "This one," she said. Nico nodded. "Then that's the one we keep." She smiled, then paused. "Do you think Maria can see us?" "Yeah," he said. "I think she never stopped." Later, Luis rode out with 2 sheriff's deputies to find other drop sites listed in the ledger. He promised to be back before harvest. Martina sent him with food wrapped in wax paper and a small silver cross he didn't wear but tucked into his boot anyway. Galvan returned to Santa Fe, taking Luz's testimony with her. "It'll help," she told them. "Others will hear. Others will act." She hugged Rosie before she left. "You saved lives," she whispered. "Don't ever forget that." Rosie didn't answer, but she didn't let go right away either. That night, a new kind of quiet settled over the ranch. It wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was the kind of quiet you got when the truth had been spoken out loud, when the weight of a thing was shared, not carried alone. And in that stillness, Nico understood something he hadn't before. Justice wasn't loud. It was a child sleeping safely through the night. It was the wind not rattling the windows. It was knowing that from now on, they would never be the ones who stayed quiet. You can't fix what happened, but you can choose what happens next. Rain came just before dawn. a soft, steady downpour that darkened the soil and brought the scent of clean earth into the windows. Nicholas stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee gone cold, listening to the drops hit the tin roof. It had been weeks since the press conference, since the arrests, since Rosie's voice went out into the world and cracked something wide open. The days had shifted. He rose early now, not from fear, but from habit. There were chores again. Not just the survival kind, but the real kind: animals to feed, tools to fix, the kind of work that stitched days together in quiet patterns. Outside, Rosie and Luce crouched by the chicken coop, feet bare, skirts hitched up to their knees as they cleaned out the trough. Rosie hummed a tune Nico didn't recognize. Luce listened, then tried to match it, off-key but earnest. Their laughter, still rare, rose like something shy, learning how to be bold. Martina was in town with a list of supplies. Luis had returned the week before with another rescued girl, older, sullen, her wrists covered in old bruises. Her name was Anna, and she hadn't said more than 10 words, but she slept through the night now, which felt like a kind of victory. Nico sipped his coffee, warmed it again, then turned back to the ledger still lying open on the table. Half the names had been found, half hadn't. He traced one with his finger. S14 male. 6. Transferred to Widow's Rest. That one had haunted him. Widow's Rest wasn't on any map. Just a nickname muttered in one of the testimonies said like a curse. But Galvan's contacts had narrowed it to a property north of El Paso. A private compound, walled, guarded, and funded by a woman named Isadora Ray. Nico had heard of her in whispers. An old land baron's daughter. Philanthropist, church patron, border protector. Owned 4 ranches and half a copper mine. Untouchable. Until now. He closed the ledger, pulled the folded paper Luis had left from his jacket. A sketched layout. Notes scribbled in pencil. One name underlined 3 times: Isadora. Footsteps padded into the kitchen. Rosie stood there, cheeks flushed, carrying a hen in her arms. "She's sick," she said. "Can I keep her in the pantry until she's better?" He blinked, then smiled. "Only if you name her something dignified," Rosie thought. "Her name's Alma. Fitting." She cradled the bird and turned to leave. "Rosie," she paused. He hesitated. "If I leave for a few days, just a few, would you be all right here?" Her face went still, where she asked, "There's someone I need to find. Someone who might still be alive." "You mean like me?" He nodded. "Then go," she said. "But come back. I will." She stepped closer, holding the chicken tighter. "Do you promise?" He reached out and touched her shoulder. "I promise." When Martina returned, Nico explained. She didn't like it. "Can't you let the law handle it?" she asked. "They don't know what we know. They don't move like you move." He nodded. She sighed, rubbed her temples. "All right. But take Luis. He's already packing." "Of course he is." She stepped forward, placed a small bundle in his coat pocket. "Dried chili, jerky, tobacco. You're useless if you're hungry." He kissed her cheek. The next morning before light, he and Luis saddled up and rode south. The desert stretched wide, flat, and red in the rising sun. Cacti stood like sentinels. Coyotes yipped in the distance. They kept a steady pace, stopping only to water the horses and consult the notes. By the second day, they saw the first sign, a wooden cross buried in a stone cairn. Not marked, just placed. "Someone remembers," Luis said. Nico nodded. That evening, they reached Widow's Rest. It wasn't what he expected. The gates weren't metal, but old wood carved with religious symbols. The house beyond was sprawling, whitewashed and wrapped in rose vines. But the beauty was skin deep. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter. An old woman sat on the porch in a high-backed chair, her face shaded by a lace veil. That's her, Luis whispered. Isadora. They waited until full dark, slipped through the west fence past the orchard into the servants' wing. It was there they found the room's 10 small cots, 5 children. All boys. Quiet, dressed too well, smiles too practiced. One stood up when he saw Nico. "You're not supposed to be here. My name's Nico," he said. "What's yours?" The boy tilted his head. "I forget." Nico crouched. "Do you want to come with us?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Luis gathered the others. They didn't fight. They didn't cry. It was like they were waiting. At the last door, a girl no older than Rosie sat with a book in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her eyes wary. "You'll get caught," she said. Maybe Nico said. "But we'll take that risk." The front door creaked open. Voices. Nico drew his revolver. Luis ushered the children through the back hall. As Nico turned the corner, Isadora stood there holding a lamp, calm as ever. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. He didn't answer. "You think this is justice?" she asked. "You think you're saving anyone? I think I'm ending something." She sighed. "The world doesn't change because a few men get angry." "No," he said. "It changes when children start talking." He backed out, left her standing there. By dawn, they were gone. The children rode in wagons Nico and Luis had stolen from the outer stables. Quiet, tired, safe. When they reached the hill overlooking the ranch, Rosie came running. Luis helped the children down. Martina gathered them with practiced arms. Nico dismounted last. Rosie looked up at him. "You came back." He nodded. She pointed to the pantry window. "Alma's feeling better. She laid an egg." He laughed and it cracked something in his chest. Not pain, something else. Relief. Or maybe peace. "You can't fix what happened," Martina said beside him. "But you can choose what happens next." And he had. He chose this, over and over, and now so had they. You can bury a body, not a truth. The funeral came sudden without warning. It wasn't anyone at the ranch. Not one of the children. Not Nico or Martina or Rosie. It was Abraham Duval, found in his shop. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no missing money. Just slumped in his chair, glasses askew, the ledger he copied resting on his lap. Some said stroke, others whispered poison. But everyone who'd read the paper that morning knew what it meant. The obituary said natural causes. Nico called it something else. Retribution. He stood over the hole while the priest muttered the last rites. The cemetery was small, tucked behind the chapel in Esperanza. No flowers on the coffin. No mourners save for him, Luis and Galvan, who drove down without speaking a word. The priest tossed a handful of dirt. He was a quiet man. Luis folded his arms. Too quiet, maybe. Nico didn't answer. Galvan stepped forward, laying a sprig of rosemary on the coffin. He chose to speak, and that killed him. "They'll try again," Nico said. "To scare us, to silence us. But now we know better," she replied. "Now we speak louder." Back at the truck, Galvan handed Nico a manila envelope. "This came to my office yesterday. No return address. Same handwriting as before." He opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Grainy black and white. A long dining table. Children seated stiffly like dolls. Men and women standing behind them, faces just out of frame. In one shot, a little girl smiled wide. Too wide. On the back, Casa de Nubes, Santa Teresa. Another name scribbled beneath, Nieves Ortega. Luis cursed under his breath. That's not a house. That's a fortress. It's a name we didn't have before, Galvan said. And a girl, Nico murmured. Nieves. You think she's still alive? Luis asked. Nico stared at the photo. If she's not, someone still remembers her. Galvan tapped the edge of the envelope. There's something else. A court date. Judge Calderon called it. 2 weeks from now. State case, not federal. Estrella Pike Reyes, they'll all be there. And they're trying to bury it fast. No media. Luis scoffed. Of course they are. Galvan's expression hardened. We won't let them. On the ride back, silence hung heavy. The mountains in the distance looked hazier than usual. Dust, maybe. Or grief. At the ranch, the children were gathered around Martina, listening to Ana read from a picture book in halting Spanish. Rosie sat beside her, correcting gently when she stumbled. Luz leaned her head on Rosie's shoulder. They didn't cry when we left. Luis said quietly. They trust now. That's what they'll target, Nico replied. That trust. Inside, he laid the photo on the kitchen table. Rosie walked in moments later, wiping her hands on her skirt. Who's that? She asked. We don't know, he said. But her name might be Nieves, and we think she was taken like you. Rosie studied the photo, her brows knit. Then her finger tapped one face partially obscured by shadow. I've seen him, she said. Where? At Estrella's. Once. He brought a boy and left with a folder. I only saw him that one day. You sure? She nodded. He had a ring, big, blue stone. Nico and Luis exchanged a look. I think we found our buyer, Luis muttered. The next morning, Galvan wired a contact in Santa Teresa. Casa de Nubes was real, a private facility listed as a youth retreat center run by a non-profit funded by Ortega family money. No permits for visitors, no paper trail of wards, just fences and security. Luis started packing again. You're not going, Martina told Nico flatly that night. Not until the hearing. You said you'd stand with them. I will, he replied. But I have to see where she went. You think you'll find her there, I think I'll find the truth. Martina shook her head. And what if it's worse than that? Nico didn't answer. He just folded a map into his coat pocket. That night, Rosie slipped a slip of paper into his hand. It was one of her drawings, Nieves, in the same dress from the photo, standing at the edge of a canyon, hair blowing sideways. Below it, Rosie had written, If she's still out there, she's waiting. He stared at the picture until sleep finally claimed him. They left before first light. Casa de Nubes stood on a ridge east of Santa Teresa, its white walls gleaming like bone against the mountainside. A metal gate blocked the only road in. Security cameras followed the arc of the driveway. There were no children in sight. Luis parked under a cottonwood tree a half-mile out. We go quiet. They moved along the ravine, climbing through scrub and shale until they reached the rear wall. Luis spotted a blind spot behind the greenhouse. Nico scaled the lattice and dropped silently into the yard. Inside, they found corridors, too clean, doors, too locked windows, too narrow. The rooms weren't bedrooms, they were observation cells. Beds bolted to the floor, cameras in corners. One door had a name etched into a small brass plate, N. Ortega. Nico pushed it open. The room was empty, but on the floor beside the cot lay a bracelet, wooden beads worn with a single silver charm shaped like a moon. He picked it up. Then he heard it. A voice from the hallway. She's not here anymore. He turned. A woman stood there, gray hair in a tight braid, eyes sharp. Who are you? Nico asked. I'm the one who cleaned up after your mess. The one who made sure the donors never saw what they paid for. He stepped closer. Where is she gone? Like the rest. But not dead, if that's what you're asking. Not yet. Nico's pulse pounded. Why? Because truth doesn't pay as well as silence. He grabbed her wrist. Where? She smiled. You won't get there before the trial, but you'll get there. And when you do, it'll be too late to change what's coming. He let go, but not before she slipped something into his hand. A card. Blank except for a symbol, a half-sun over an open book. Luis met him at the fence. "Did you find her?" "No," Nico said. "But I found where the trail ends." As they disappeared into the trees, wind kicked dust behind them like smoke from a fire long buried. You can bury a body, not a truth. And the truth was beginning to rise. They taught us to kneel. We're teaching ourselves how to stand. The courthouse smelled like paper and dust and nerves. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly, but inside the old building held a lingering chill, like justice hadn't yet warmed its bones. Rows of wooden pews creaked under the weight of spectators, some in crisp suits, some in worn boots and faded blouses. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras lowered but ready. A rustle of whispers hung just below the surface like a tide about to break. Nicholas stood beside Rosie near the front bench, dressed in his one good shirt, the collar still stiff from Martina's careful ironing. His boots were clean, the old scuffs oiled away, but his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. He felt exposed under the fluorescence, like someone was watching him, not as a man, but as a warning. Rosie was still. Her braid had come undone a little, and she didn't seem to mind. She held Masa to her chest thumb, rubbing slow circles over the bear's stitched ear. She wasn't shaking. She hadn't all morning. The door opened, and the accused filed in one by one. Estrella Vargas walked like she was in church, head-high veil, pinned fingers clasped at her waist. Behind her, Pike shuffled thinner now, his preacher's confidence eroded. Samir Reyes didn't bother with the performance. He sat with his lawyer, arms crossed, looking bored. Rosie didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward. Judge Calderon entered last. His black robe swept the ground as he climbed to the bench. "We are here today," he began, "not just to determine the guilt of a few individuals, but to shine light where shadows have clung for too long." The trial began. The prosecution called witnesses. Testimonies layered one after another, cold facts, medical records, travel logs, financial documents. But it wasn't until the survivors began to speak that the room changed. A boy named Emiliano, now 20, spoke of the Blue Room and how the lights would flicker before they took someone away. A woman, her face lined with years of silence, told how they used hymns as commands. "They made us sing while they hurt us," she said, "so we'd think the pain was sacred." The courtroom held its breath. Then it was Rosie's turn. She stood when her name was called, straight-backed eyes clear. Nico rose to follow, but she waved him off. She walked to the stand alone. The clerk asked her to state her name. She gave it voice, small but sure. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Her hands rested in her lap, Masa placed beside her like a silent shield. "What do you remember?" the prosecutor asked. "Everything." A pause. "I remember the first time I was told my name didn't belong to me. I remember being told I was chosen, but not for anything good. I remember being told if I ran, no one would come for me." "Did you believe them for a while?" And now she looked at Nico. "Now I know they lied." The lawyer nodded. "What do you want this court to understand?" Rosie turned to the jury. "That we weren't weak, we weren't stupid, we were children, and we survived. And now, we're still learning how to live. Did anyone protect you?" She smiled faint. "Yes." "Who?" She pointed at Nico. The prosecutor turned. "For the record, that's Nicolas Ibarra." Rosie nodded. He listened. That was all it took. The defense tried to challenge her. Asked her if she remembered too clearly, if perhaps her trauma had colored the truth. If she could really say who was to blame. She didn't raise her voice. But she said, if you sit in the same room where someone breaks a child and say nothing, you broke them too. There were no more questions. Back at the bench, she sat down and Nico wrapped his arm around her shoulder. She didn't cry. Luis testified next, blunt and unfiltered, naming every backdoor deal and fake sermon he'd witnessed. Martina followed, reading off copies of forged birth records and inventory lists, her voice shaking with fury. Galvan came in last, flanked by a stack of documents and a grim expression. Every system failed these children, she said. Church, law, health, education. They didn't just fall through cracks, they were pushed. The courtroom erupted only once when an audio recording was played. Rosie's voice from weeks ago. There were girls who never came back. They said they were too wild, or too slow, or too loud. Her voice was calm on the tape. I was all of those things, but I stayed, and I listened, so I could tell you. Vargas's veil shook slightly. Pike wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Reyes looked at the floor. When the tape ended, the room sat frozen. Then the judge spoke. We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. As the crowd spilled out into the late afternoon heat, reporters swarmed the steps, hungry for statements. But no one from the ranch stopped to speak. They walked quietly down the courthouse steps. Outside, protest signs lined the sidewalks now. Protect the children. Justice is watching. No more silence. And a handmade sign held by a girl no older than 12, I'm still here. Back at the ranch, a meal waited. Galvan stayed late drinking coffee on the porch with Martina. Luis sat in the dirt, with Luz and Ana helping them draw new maps of the property, each one marking where the safe spots were. Where to hide, where to yell, where to be found. Nico sat with Rosie under the mesquite tree. They listened, she said. They did. But it won't be over tomorrow. No, he agreed. But they know your name now. She nodded. Do you think they'll ever forget? Not if we keep reminding them. She leaned her head against his arm, her voice barely above a whisper. They taught us to kneel, she said. He looked down at her. But we're teaching ourselves how to stand. Some scars stay, but so do the hands that help carry them. It took the jury 6 hours. Nicholas sat in the back row of the courtroom, flanked by Luis and Martina, their clothes still dusted from the morning chores. Rosie was up front with Galvan holding Luz's hand, both girls still and solemn as the bailiff called the room to order. The air was too still, like it was waiting to exhale. All rise. Judge Calderon entered. No ceremony, just gravity. The jury filed in behind him, expressions carved from stone. The foreman stood. A woman with salt-gray hair and steady shoulders. In the case of Estrella Vargas, guilty on all counts. In the case of Reverend James Pike, guilty on all counts. In the case of Samir Reyes, guilty on all counts. Each word struck like thunder. Rosie didn't move. Luz blinked hard, gripping tighter. Behind them, Martina let out a breath that had been stuck for a year. Nico closed his eyes. Justice didn't roar. It landed quiet, heavy, final. The judge thanked the jury, set a sentencing date, and dismissed the court. Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But the ranch family didn't stop. They walked out through the courthouse doors the same way they had walked in, shoulder to shoulder, with nothing left to prove. Outside, the air was thick with summer heat, but for the first time, it felt clean. At the ranch, they returned to the work that never stopped. The younger children weeded the garden under Luis's eye. Martina kneaded dough for fresh tortillas. Nico hammered new hinges onto the barn door. It creaked less now. It sounded less like the past. Later, under the shade of the pepper tree, Rosie sat with Ana and Luz, teaching them to sew. The girls struggled with the threading, pricking fingers, giggling, cursing under their breath. "You'll get it," Rosie said. "It just takes time." Anna looked up. "Did you ever want to run away, even after?" Rosie smiled. "I did run, but I learned that healing doesn't come from running. It comes from staying and building something that wasn't there before." They stitched in silence for a while. Then Luce looked over. "What happens to them now?" "The bad ones." Luce nodded. "They go away, to a place where they can't hurt anyone again." "Do they say sorry sometimes?" "But not enough." Luce tilted her head. "Do you have to forgive?" Rosie looked down at her hands. The needle paused mid-air. "No," she said finally. "Not if it breaks something in you." The girls nodded. It made sense to them in a way most adults would never understand. By sundown, Galvan returned with a folder thick with named survivors from other towns, counties, states. Some who had found their way home, others still searching. A few no longer living, but remembered now. "I'm building something," she said to Nico that night over coffee. "An archive. A place for all of it, names, dates, stories. So no one can pretend this didn't happen." He nodded. "You'll need a name." She looked at Rosie, who sat cross-legged in the grass, sketching with a blunt pencil. "I already have one." She gave it to me. "The House of Echoes." "I like it," Nico said. "It's not about screaming," Galvan said. "It's about remembering. Making sure the pain doesn't just disappear, it's carried, honored." That night, they lit a fire. Not for cooking or heat, but for the ones who weren't there to see the day. A pile of branches, sage and mesquite. Around it, they placed the drawings Rosie had made over the months of Maria of Nieves, of Emiliano, and the girl with the braid, whose name no one knew. Rosie stepped forward and dropped in one last sketch, a faceless figure, hands outstretched, light rising behind them. "She could have been any of us," she said. "So we remember her as all of us." Martina read a prayer. Galvan added a name to her list. Luis played a low chord on the old guitar. No one sang. They just watched the flames catch rise, drift toward the stars. Later, when the fire had burned low and most had gone inside, Rosie stayed behind. Nico sat beside her, silent. "She's still out there, isn't she?" Rosie asked. "Who knows? Or someone like her?" He nodded. "Probably." Rosie's voice dropped. "Then we have more work." He looked at her. "You think you're ready, no?" she said. "But I'll go anyway." He smiled. "That's how I know you are." The wind picked up, warm, dry, familiar. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Some scars stay," she said. He didn't argue. He knew she was right. "But so do the hands that help carry them," she added. And he nodded. The ranch didn't go quiet that night. It breathed. It pulsed. It held stories, now painful, beautiful, unfinished stories. And in that held breath, something had shifted. They were no longer just survivors. They were keepers, builders, witnesses. And nothing, no lie, no silence, no system could take that from them again. The educational lesson learned from this story is that quiet courage matters more than grand gestures. Ordinary people, even when wounded or afraid, can protect one another by choosing to listen, speak up, and stand together when it counts. It reminds us that healing is rarely fast, but steady kindness and presence can rebuild lives piece by piece. For those of us who've lived long enough to see both hardship and grace, it's a gentle call to keep showing up for others, because sometimes simply staying beside someone is the most powerful act of justice there is.